Nietzsche and Heidegger, I think, both kind of understood that power is never really something that ends, an end result. It's always in a state of creation and continuation. So as you're envying that person that you're modeling, you're also secretly, or maybe even not secretly, you're trying to surpass them. But there is no real sense of when it should stop. And that's why religion comes in, right?
Yes, absolutely. So you could think of that impulse that Nietzsche identifies as will to power. And Nietzsche talks a lot about will to power. What is will to power? What does will to power want? Girard says, well, what Nietzsche is saying is will to power wants the insurmountable obstacle. Nietzsche says will to power wants more power, and it's just constantly striving for more and more power, and it's endless. It's almost like this loop that's playing out that's never satisfied. And so that's what's awakened in human beings by way of their mimesis. So it's a problem for human beings. It's also our greatest strength because we're hyper imitative, but it's also leads to the problem of violence for Girard, which is a very different thesis from the postmodern position, which says violence is caused by meta narratives or something, or absolute truth and things like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be thought of necessarily as an evil. In other words, human beings have a way of trying to seek power to do good. But the problem, of course, is unless you've also established an ending for that, like a clear purpose, you will continually just build that momentum toward a never-ending kind of cosmological chasing of power. And in some ways, that's what happens here in especially modern postmodernism, if you allow me a kind of a flunkyism, or postmodernism of today, is that there never seems to be a clear sense of what is the ending or where is the ending.
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell my students, that's Nietzsche there. I always tell my students, Nietzsche is 100% right about 70% of the time. You know, power is a very powerful, it's a very powerful explanation. It's almost like the way Daniel Dennett talks about Darwin's hypothesis, that it's this universal acid that eats through everything. The problem is if you give power all that control and say power is the fundamental explanation of reality, then it destroys even the predication that power is the fundamental explanation of reality. In other words, you explain away explanation. You can't even explain anything if everything's about power, because even that explanation would be not an explanation, but it would be about power. And so I think Nietzsche needs to be, contained within a larger sphere of the metaphysical and the Judeo-Christian tradition, things like this. But Nietzsche too, this idea about power, that Nietzsche, if Nietzsche's right, if and that's what postmodernism is essentially saying, that look, we criticize everything in the world and reduce it to power structures. And when we have that, we critique reason, and what's left after reason? Power, right? Power is the fundamental explanation, and then power naturally bifurcates into the strong and the weak. And then we have collective identities being the primary way we understand people. That's not to say we don't need to understand them that way, but that's the primary way. Then Nietzsche asked this question, which I find fascinating, that Girard sort of brought out in Nietzsche. Namely, wait a minute, if power is the fundamental way of understanding the world, and the world bifurcates into strong and weak, splits into strong and weak, why side with the weak? That's just an arbitrary, sort of idea we inherit from the Judeo-Christian culture. There's no reason. And Nietzsche really took this seriously, which is very strange. In the Antichrist, for example, he says, let the weak die off. Let the weak and the ill-constituted perish. This is the first principle of my philanthropy. He says, let them, they're ripe for destruction. It's a kind of radical social Darwinism in Nietzsche. But I think Nietzsche's right that if the world is simply power, we have no good reason or explanation for siding with the weak other than 2,000 years of catechesis in Judeo-Christianity.